Welcome everyone to our panel for today for the grant Global Family Systems and Psychosocial Resilience. So this grant is funded by the Citizen Diplomacy Action Fund in response to the coronavirus, to the COVID-19 pandemic. And we're focusing on resilience in the grant. And so what we've asked is for people who are working in family systems approaches in different parts of the globe to talk about their work and to share with us experience in their professional life, wherever they might be. So I apologize, I just remind everyone to please mute yourself if you're not speaking. And Dorcas also and Gamila, you can mute speakers because I hear a feedback here myself. And thank you for being here. We're so excited about the panelists that we have today. And Gamila, do you mind introducing our first panelist, and then I'll introduce the second one?
Sure. Thank you, Laurie. It's my pleasure to introduce Rana Banaja. She's one of the first Saudi family therapists. She's a professional with more than 10 years experience between Jeddah, Saudi Arabia, and Florida, the United States. Rana has a PhD in family therapy from Nova Southeastern University. She works as a family therapist at Tawazun Space, a private practice in Saudi Arabia. Rana also works as an assistant professor at King Abdul Aziz University. Rana's focus of research and training is to bring awareness to the profession of family therapy in the kingdom. Rana is also interested in topics like self of the therapist epistemology, empathy, resilience, and the multicultural aspects of therapy. That's it.
Thank you. And our second panelist is Jai Shree Adhyaru. She is a chartered counseling psychologist with about 20 years of experience working with children, teenagers, and families in a variety of settings. Out of London, she's in London. Her specialisms, was that lightning, Gamila? Like lightning in Sri Lanka. Is working with technology and the use of apps, virtual reality and augmented reality in her clinical work. And she specializes in the implementation of services that are targeted at populations that cannot access mental health services through traditional means. She currently works as the service manager for the NHS Grenfell Health and Wellbeing Service for children and young people. And in addition to her work at NHS, she also offers consultancy work to professionals on a range of issues, offers specialist supervision, and especially for folks who are trying to manage the emotional impact of working with people in distress. So she holds a number of different roles with professional regulatory bodies, including the Health and Care Professions Council and the British Psychological Society. She also guest lectures at the University of East London. So we're so pleased to have both of our panelists here to talk about their work. And so we'll start, as we usually do, with 15 minutes with one of our guests and 15 with the other. And we will hand it over to both of you. Then we'll have questions at the end.
Hello, everyone. First of all, this is Rana Banaja. I'm really pleased to be here. Thank you for having me. It's my pleasure to be part of this panel, international panel, I would say. Before I start, I was just thinking to give you a sneak peek of what's happening during the pandemic in Saudi Arabia. And as a collectivist society, I was thinking maybe it's better to talk about it from us, not just what I did, but what was happening, what we did as a community, and then maybe my little part of it. I also wanted to to say maybe this, it's a hadith, it's a saying from Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. It's a saying that it might show how it is very important for us as a community to be together. How are we a collectivist society? So the saying is believers' affection and empathy is like the body. If an organ complains, the rest of the body stands up for it by staying awake and or having a fever. And it's just, to me, it shows how systems work, and how just one part or one organ or one part of the society, when something happens, it's for the whole body to stand up for it, and that's why I was thinking maybe it's better to talk about us and then me. So when the pandemic started, Saudi Arabia is going through a lot of changes. It was going through changes, and it is not just because of the pandemic, but changes in our culture and rules and woman power, and a lot of changes. It's been a lot of changes. And with the pandemic, maybe it's shocking for some people, but with the pandemic and with showing this part of togetherness, it's like a cool breeze where it shows the roots. We have the roots, we have this identity, togetherness, and the change is also, and growth is also going on. And I'm not saying it's an easy thing having a pandemic. No, it was and it is still a really hard storm, and it is difficult. But I decided to talk about how being together as a society really helped us to be resilient. Yeah. So, and it's not just thinking about it. It's not just me as a therapist or us as therapists, but really society. I mean, in Jeddah, I am from Jeddah, one of the biggest cities in Saudi Arabia. So I don't want to talk about Saudi Arabia because it's huge, but let's talk about Jeddah. And I'm assuming that other big cities like Riyadh or Dammam, it might have the same effect. What I'm saying now, maybe in the rural areas, it's a little bit different. But just showing that, as I said, showing the togetherness, and it's so visible nowadays with social media, with showing the volunteers, the act of giving, the act of being. And it's different from person to person. A therapist would do like free talks or workshops or support groups. Doctors, artists, different. And it's just a community with its variety, but at the same time, just them standing up together was really, seeing that was really amazing, not just for me, but for the whole community. We were talking about it, we were there, we were present. Every day someone would post something, or there's, like, as I said, talks. So I'm in the university, so they would do like free workshops, talks, and me in the private practice, not just the one that I work in, but also other private practices also showed that through support groups for anxiety. There's one that I did for anxiety for moms. In the university, I did a talk about resilient. And as I said, it's not just me, but it's us. And that's just one of the things that I contributed. But it's not about individuals. It's about the community together, and everyone stood up with what they can. Yeah. And also with the government too, in the same page, with the briefings, with the online apps, knowing who's healthy, who's not, and as I said, with the social media, everyone is knowing. So it's not just and what I mean is knowing, I mean like it's seeing the efforts, and as a system, seeing one effort, how that not just influence the whole community, and maybe then the other day another therapist would do something, and then the other therapist would do something as a collectivist society. So it was really amazing seeing that. Also, I was working into a research paper. I'm still working on it. It's not published yet, but there was one of them was about resilience, family resilience, and it was really amazing seeing how 83% of the participants was stating reported that there's a strong relationship with their families during the pandemic, like during the first, I think, 2-3 months. 85% reported that COVID had actually positive influence of the family relationship. So that was like, for me, like, also I was working on another research. It was about anxiety in university students, and 47% reported that they have mild anxiety. And me just comparing it with other studies where it was with university students during the pandemic, it was moderate to extreme. So for me, that was and again, and I'm not saying that the pandemic did not influence us or it was easy. The storm was really hard, but the sense of community, it brought resilience, and that's how I see it, and we see it. Yeah, so that was my briefing on how I perceived us as a community in Saudi Arabia during the pandemic, and then the government, and then and then my part of yeah.
So hi, thank you so much for having me here today. It's an absolute pleasure to be here. I've been listening to quite a few of the panels, so I hope that I can add something useful today.
Okay, let me just... You can keep talking, sorry.
Okay, I'll keep talking. So my name is Jay, and I work as a consultant psychologist in a service that was set up in London in response to a fire that took place in June 2017. The fire took place at Grenfell Tower and was described as one of the worst man-made disasters since the Second World War here in this country. And thinking about the work that was done, I felt that it might be helpful to shine a bit of a light on how the service was set up and how digital technology helped us both within the initial stages of the crisis response and also as the service developed. So I'll be talking through some of the broad aims of this overall program panel, but as I said, with a particular focus on thinking about how digital technology can be used in disaster response settings and also in building resilience within the communities that we all are serving. In thinking about where I fit, I have quite an interest in tech, and I think that helps with any kind of work that we do. I also have an interest in helping people, which is why I choose to work in this profession. And One of the most appealing factors about digital technology, I guess, is that it allows us to reach quite a large number of people, although it has certain limitations. And the reason that I felt this was relevant is because although I'm working in London, more than half of our global population, which is currently around 4.2 billion people, currently also live in cities. And there's an increasing trend across the planet towards further urbanization, particularly amongst younger people, with what's described as a sort of outward migration from more rural areas towards cities. And living in cities is associated with a number of factors, as well as increased population density. There's traffic and noise pollution. However, there's also better access to healthcare and other commodities. So there are pros and cons to thinking about disaster response in the context of a city. The research within our field has really highlighted that there are probably more significant differences between our own city urban areas and our rural areas than perhaps there are across cities across the world. And I hope that some of this work can be generalized to other areas. So when thinking about the urban environment, the table on the next slide shows that there are common factors that exist even in the absence of a disaster. So things like access to green space, housing, transport, healthcare, the pollution that I've mentioned, and also digital access and inclusion. There's much variability within a country in terms of areas that have access to Wi-Fi and mobile phone signal. And I guess that also has social consequences. So it impacts on population patterns, as I've described. For example, in areas where it's difficult to access Wi-Fi, it can also be difficult to access opportunities. Lots of job postings and offers of support are often navigated online. And then I've outlined briefly some of the psychological consequences and economic consequences that can really exacerbate mental health. So this framework is looking at the need to recognize what the needs are in a particular population, and particularly recognize the needs of city dwellers and the psychological consequences that a disaster can have on people's mental health. As we've seen this year and last year with the onset of coronavirus, no person or place is immune from disasters or disaster-related losses. And working in a disaster zone really helps us to see that whilst the needs are great, there's also many, many systems involved that can have an influence and a positive influence and potentially be a source of support. I'm quite a visual person, so this sort of hexagon diagram kind of represents how the contents of my brain work. And in thinking about the response to the Grenfell Tower fire, there were many, many systems involved from the very first day of that fire. Again, a commonality across communities around the world, whether that's rural or urban, is that it is often the immediate community that quite rightly is there to respond in the first instance. And that could be friends and neighbours and family members, local community groups and youth groups, faith groups opening up their doors to provide practical support and offer guidance. And this framework, I think, is really important because there are a lot of people that are involved in those immediate stages of the post-disaster context. One of the considerations is who is doing what and for how long, where are they doing it and until when. And when you look at the broad spectrum of influences, I guess I sit within currently the NHS framework, which has been involved in supporting this community since the disaster occurred. I guess I'm asking another question, is that also how do we engage with those affected? And how do we also harness and work with these supporting and influencing systems? It might seem out of reach for any one of us in our organizations or within our boundaries to think about our relationships with the other systems. But this perspective, I think, is what can really build community resilience in a more joined up way. So I draw upon the framework of Hopeful and Al. It's a free article to download. I'm sure many of you are familiar with it already, but what I like about this approach is that it reminds us that all the way through our attempts to help people following a disaster or a crisis, there are 5 essential elements. And I don't think these are like 5 checks at the beginning. I think there are 5 essential elements that really help us think about what people need all the way through the journey of managing through a crisis. And first of all is the need for a calming approach. This was talked about in the previous talk in terms of how people from a more collectivist culture might have found the initial stages of COVID to have some positive gains. And I'm really curious about why that might be. I'll save my curiosity for the questions. But I think there is something in the need to connect with other people in the face of something awful happening. It's a very basic human need for us to connect. And in that connection, there can be a calming effect. That calming effect can occur through conversations, through listening to other people, allowing ourselves to be reminded that what we're experiencing or feeling or thinking is absolutely normal. It's normal in the context of a very abnormal situation. And a lot of the work that was done in these early stages was through face-to-face outreach. And this is where digital technology first sort of took a hold for me. The picture there is one of my colleagues, Ross O'Brien, trialing out a virtual reality headset. And his body language in this picture is wonderful because he's completely relaxed. Near the end of the working day, it's just gone 4 o'clock. And we were trying out some relaxation environments in the virtual reality headsets. And this is because that calming approach is required for the people affected by the disaster, but also for those helping to support people affected by the disaster. I can talk about that another time, but this is where virtual reality first came into play for us.
Jay, we've lost your audio.
Can you guys still hear me?
Yes, you're back.
Yes, yes. Let's continue.
Okay, I'm going to keep going unless I get a message to say that people still can't hear me. I hope that's okay. Wonderful. Okay, so I'll just recap in terms of what I was saying about virtual reality. So the photograph that was taken is of my colleague, Ross O'Brien, when we were doing some outreach work with a local youth centre. If you think back to my little hexagon diagram, you'll see that youth centres are one of the key influencing systems. You know, there are people that have worked with children and young people in this area for way longer than many of us have. They have the relationships with young people, and we wanted to create an environment where we could reach those children and young people that might need help in the aftermath of the disaster. And this was a creative way of doing it. in terms of using VR with our youth centre colleagues, and then engaging children and young people in conversations about how they were doing through a range of different experiences. We also undertook a trauma animations project. Again, this is to meet this very important aim of providing information in a calm way, reaching those people affected. And the trauma animations project took around 2 years in total to work through, because the engagement, again, with our community was really key. I'll move on to the next slide. On the next slide, you can see some snippets from the animations. They are free to download, and I've included all the links. But I think what was really important about this work was that it was inspired by a conference that we attended. And the conference was called Quidere, and it was a pan-European approach to disaster management and resilience, specifically focused on children and children's perspective. It's often found that children are a bit of an afterthought when we're thinking about the information that is provided after a disaster or a crisis, or what's normal, or where help can be found. It's most often targeted at adults in the first instance. And the Quidere project really inspired us to think about how we could, how we could hold the child's voice in mind from the outset. Giving psychoeducational information about the possible impact of trauma was really important. But when I was going through the existing literature, I just kept finding older people talking about the brain in a very jargon-filled way with lots of diagrams and complicated words. And I thought, gosh, this isn't very interesting for me, and this is my field. So I can't imagine how it would reach children and young people. So through a series of engagement events, again with our partners in the local community, we worked with children and young people and really learnt from them. We tried to describe trauma in the way that we would to this audience, and they helped us understand what kinds of feelings might arise and how those feelings are described by children. The end result was 3 separate stories. Sam's story is a story for younger children, and it talks about what a traumatic event is. Now, this sounds like quite a simple task, but explaining perhaps to a 7-year-old that when you witness something awful, or when you have a fear about somebody close to you dying, this is what it might feel like. And of course, I'm sure you can appreciate this had to be done very sensitively with parental consent, ensuring that children weren't triggered by things that they'd experienced, and also thinking about how involvement in these workshops provided them with an opportunity to really process their own experiences and work with other children and young people with similar experiences. The second story, called Sarah's Story, again showed us how much we can learn from adolescents as well. So the adolescents felt that the animation above was quite a childish response, and they gave us this ingenious idea of a text story. You might have seen these on social media where you're actually watching a conversation between 2 people take place via text or SMS messaging. And this group of young people created a different way of explaining trauma and the impact through a conversation that Sarah was having with her friends via SMS. I just think it's so clever, and I'm in awe of the creativity here, because it's not a way of explaining a concept that I personally would have come up with. But it really shows how the impact of trauma can be picked up in behavioral changes that peers and children of their own age may well notice before adults do on many occasions. And then lastly, we have Ashley's story, which again highlighted to us that many young people have quite interesting ideas about what therapy or treatment might involve. I'm giving you a very condensed version here, but we did some focus groups with children and young people about what they imagined their first therapy session would be like. And if you watch the animation, you'll see we've incorporated a lot of their worries. So this is really helping young people normalize that it's normal to have worries and ideas about what therapy is. And this is what it looked like for Ashley. She talks about her first therapy session and what she found helpful. And together, I think they provide a really interesting way of mixing approaches. So offering that face-to-face support, working with different communities within the same locality over a period of time, and then using the the technology that we have and a partnership with a company called the Fred Company to then produce something that I hope can reach many, many more children. The second principle is around creating a sense of safety. I'm not going to go through all the slide. There you'll see a child using the VR headset in one of our outreach events that took place over the summer. So post-disaster, it's really important to, for us as professionals to be visible, for children and young people to have the opportunity to ask questions about things that they're worried about, to normalize play and routines, and to recognize that we also need to support children by supporting their parents. And again, having digital ways of disseminating information and reaching whole families at these kinds of community events. You can see the boy's little sister in the background also having a go. I just felt it was I guess a different way to reach out to people that might need therapeutic support. Hopeful also talks about giving a community that sense of self-efficacy, which means that we are not there to go in and do something to fix a community. The community existed before the disaster happened. The community will continue to exist, and our job as supporting helpers is to really listen and then act. So the next slide shows a couple of examples of how we listened and acted. And in the context of COVID, we've had to listen and act by continuing to keep some of our clinical services open throughout this period as essential workers, and also offer a different solution, and listening to the fact that some people did not want to come to the clinic setting. I've given a couple of examples here. We really tried to work with the community. We created roles for service user consultants. So the animations were co-created by children and young people, with them shaping and guiding the characters and the stories that were going to be used. But we have service user consultants that work on interview panels. They shape our leaflets. They tell us when the words we're using and the language is wrong. I've included a picture there and a little snippet from an article you can find online, which describes how in this country our NHS lanyards are typically blue. Nationally, they're blue. And people associate that with the NHS. But for this community, there was an association with being unwell, or perhaps having poor mental health. And our chief executive acted very promptly and changed our lanyards to green for the Grenfell community. So just such a simple act like that, understanding what symbols mean, that this was not a community that was suffering from a mental health problem. It was a community recovering from something awful that had happened to them. And within that community, some people may develop PTSD. So from the very early phases, we really wanted to work with the community, and the development of the psychoeducational trauma material, I guess, was another act that tried to hear what children and young people were telling us, again, about our language and our symbols and what's most helpful to them. The final two principles from Hopeful focus on connectedness and hope. And I think the animations for me symbolize all of those things. In the making of the animations, the children connected with one another. Our teams connected with community organizations. Our staff worked with youth workers and art therapists and psychologists to make sure that the children and young people were supported in creating this material that would be helpful to other people. I think projects can be a helpful focus for connectedness. And the Draw My Home Time project was created by one of our under 5 specialists to keep little ones under the age of 5 connected during the lockdown period here in the UK. It was launched as a Facebook and Instagram campaign where children could share what they were doing during their lockdown time through pictures, and it was just another really, I guess, positive outcome, and coming together at a time when people felt quite disconnected and separated from one another. So I guess in summary, I've kind of tried to highlight a couple of different potential implementation areas for technology in terms of information. You know, there's scope to use a range of messaging platforms and websites and social media to reach children and young people going through a crisis or a disaster. It can also be used in an engaging way, to have fun, to start conversations with people, because the conversations are the start of any good professional relationship. They can also be used for interventions, which is what we've moved to more during this period of lockdown, just as we're doing now, and also thinking about how video and other kinds of remote-based treatment offers might be helpful, and currently looking at which apps might also complement therapy. But of course there are barriers, and I just wanted to remind people that in the UK, 13% of adults state that they've never used the internet. I was really surprised as a city dweller when I came across this research. And I suppose it reminds us that whilst there are huge benefits to harnessing technology in the context of a disaster, there are legitimate barriers that will need to be overcome. And I've highlighted some of those below. In terms of buy-in, is there engagement? Is there interest in your area, in your teams, in your organizations? Is there someone that's going to champion that and really say, hey, I think this could be quite helpful? And then thinking about, do you have the staff with the skill set or the interest? And I place both with equal value, because I think skill and interest are really important. You know, having enthusiasm can often compensate for not knowing how to do something, for sure. And then all of those economic and social factors that we've talked about in terms of just whether it's actually possible in terms of connectivity and equipment, as well as issues of privacy, which may vary from country to country. But overall, you will gauge that I am quite a fan. I don't know if this video link will work, but if not, it's on our Facebook page. So usually on the anniversary, this picture is some members of my team who have been absolutely integral in most of the work that I've talked about. And on the anniversary of the Grenfell Tower fire, we usually attend in person. And last year, we weren't able to do that. So here's a final example of using technology to send a message to the community that we serve. And if it doesn't load here, you can find it on the Facebook page. One of the community slogans around this disaster is holding those that died forever in our hearts, and reminding ourselves that that's the reason that we came to serve this community. So that video has our team members saying forever in our hearts in a number of different languages, as our staff team represents quite a diverse population, which reflects the population that we serve. Thank you for listening to me. I've included links and references at the end, and yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Jay.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, so powerful, both of your presentations, and the questions. I actually wrote in my notes here, the questions are awesome. So let's make sure we take the next at least 10 minutes to cover what's written in the chat. And then if folks want to vocalize their question, not everybody has the same audio ability at the moment. So, but I think the first three questions are for you, Rana. If you're there, you can read them, or if the person wants to read them that asked the question.
Sure.
And yeah, where is it?
I
Up here
think
from Howla at 11:25. Yeah.
All right. So it's, can you specify how the state helped the citizens to face family problems during the pandemic, economy, education, health, psychology? I can say some of these. For example, education, the online schooling was immediately after, like less than a month, the homeschooling, the online schooling, the governmental, I mean, the public schools and also the private schools immediately started after the pandemic, which was a quick move. And also for university, I work in the university, and the switch was also fast. Also the healthcare, one of the things that I remembered I didn't talk about, I also volunteered from the Ministry of Health. They asked for volunteers from therapists to have. They had like a hotline for frontliners, from doctors and nurses who are living actually, you know, in the hospitals with the pandemic and with all the COVID-19 patients. So they offered that for them. That's just one of the things, and it was really touching. Just yes, I'm not there, but just to, as a therapist, to connect in different ways, and to help the frontliners, even in that small way, their anxieties, their fear. So that was also one of the things. Yeah. I'm gonna go to the other question. What were some of the demographics of the families you interviewed with reported improved connection or closeness during the pandemic? So actually, it was we sent them a survey. So it was for individuals. We sent them a survey. It was 700 participants. And they were from high school to bachelor's to master's, and some of them have PhDs. Females more than males. Yeah, but it was not like interview. It was more like of a survey that we sent online when the pandemic started. I'm not sure if there's another question.
There is.
Rana, sorry, before you go into the next question, can you just clarify? So for the participants who did the surveys, would you say that a certain SES was excluded if they did not have internet or access to the survey?
The survey was sent to them through WhatsApp. So it was accessible for those people. It was an easy survey, easy access through WhatsApp. Sent the links, and that's why we had 700 people, because it's easy to and also it was me and two other PhD holders in the university. So also we had that community. Maybe if I'm in a different place, I would not get 700, that easily. But with the sense of community, it was easy that way. I'm not sure if there's another one. I can't. I'm lost.
There's there's one that says from Charity. Great to hear about the sense of community where you are in Saudi Arabia. I'm wondering what factors possibly decrease the anxiety levels of university students.
Actually, and I'm not done with that paper yet, but the connectedness, the togetherness, and actually I wanted to write about how post-traumatic stress can change to post-traumatic growth, because it is traumatic to have, for some people, to have these changes suddenly in one day, with the fear and all of that. But maybe one of the things is actually the togetherness, the connectedness, the normalizing of what's happening in being together.
Dr. Rana,
Mm-hmm.
one question I didn't write. If there is time,
Sure.
please. I just wanted to ask if you've noticed any change in the language used when mental health is spoken about, or emotional well-being. Have you noticed in this last year?
You mean in the community, how they talked about mental health? Absolutely, because with all the awareness, and with all the as I said before, when it started, all the not all, but a lot of therapists were there talking about, and talking about the pandemic, talking about anxiety, doing the support group. So all of that, actually, you can see it, that it's nowadays it's okay, and it's not like a shift, but it is kind of, you can see how it is now normalized, seeing a therapist, talking to a therapist, and it's there, and the social media, through social media, and it really, we can see how the social media is the effect or the influence of social media, and how not just people can see it, but also people can know that it's just normalized, I would say. Is there another question, or is there any?
I'll ask a quick question just to tag on. So the little that I know a little bit about Saudi. I know that Jeddah is probably, and correct me if I'm wrong, but more, I guess you could say, progressive, or kind of just a little bit more specifically with topics such as mental health, right? As people are a little bit more on board with that compared to somewhere else, like Riyadh or Khobar.
Okay, so I'm from Jeddah. I would say yes, maybe 2 years ago or 1 year ago. But Riyadh is moving really fast. Dammam too. So I would say the bigger cities are like really moving fast. And I can't say that Jeddah more. I think Riyadh and Jeddah and Dammam, the three of them, more. But then the other cities are not so.
I see. Is there a sense, like in, for example, specifically the mental health care community, making efforts towards like going to these more kind of like smaller areas, or areas like less in the big cities, to kind of just spread, I guess, community mental health, or try to change like the narrative surrounding, because I know that there can be a lot of shame regarding.
Absolutely. This is a really great question. I think we're not there yet, but social media, again, is a really huge thing. And then it's there, and you don't know who is seeing it. And I can't say that it's not influencing, but maybe going and having more awareness in these areas is important. Now, just you talking about it, I'm like, yeah, it's important. We're not there yet.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Questions for either of the panelists, or from the panelists? There was a general question about your accessing your email. So if you're welcome, if you want to put anything in the chat, you can put your email or the links you mentioned, Jay, because I couldn't see them anyway in the PowerPoint. But if you can certainly post that in the chat, we often do that, and people can pick that up. A question, so from other guests.
I have a comment for Jay. I was so thrilled to see you mention the risk factors for developing mental illness, because those social determinants of health are so frequently not talked about, and so it was great to see you addressing, the physical, economic, and all the other factors that go into how some communities develop worse mental illness than others. So yeah, for me, that was just heartwarming to see you address that aspect as well.
Thank you for that feedback. It's something I'm really passionate about because, as I said, disaster can strike all of us, but we're not all starting from the same baseline, I guess. And some of the work in psychosocial support, I mean, today I've talked about psychoeducation and well-being, but equally important was to, provide people with basic needs. And, one of the current initiatives that I know my service is involved in is supporting a food bank which is focused on babies. So providing those things that somebody might need when they've just had a baby and it's lockdown and they haven't got the usual support networks around them. So yeah, thank you for the feedback. Always basic needs first, right?
Mm-hmm.